The capture. Consciousness returns with a shock. Lieutenant James Morrison woke to the taste of metal and the sound of humming crystals. His head throbbed as consciousness crept back through the fog of whatever they'd used to knock him out. The last thing he remembered was the ambush in the violet forests of Nethys, plasma fire cutting through the twisted trees, and Captain Torres screaming for them to fall back. The crystalline prison. Jimmy opened his eyes to walls that seemed alive. The entire cell was carved from some kind of translucent crystal that pulsed with soft blue light. No bars, no obvious door, just smooth surfaces that reflected his battered face back at him from a dozen angles. He tried to move and felt the weight of energy shackles around his wrists and ankles. The restraints didn't look like metal. They seemed to be made of the same living crystal as the walls. "You're awake," a voice said from behind him. Jimmy spun around as much as the shackles allowed. In the corner of the cell sat a figure he hadn't noticed before. At first glance, she looked human. Long silver hair, pale skin, wearing something that might have been a prisoner's robe. But as she moved closer, he could see the differences. Her eyes were too large, too bright, shifting between blue and violet like the crystals around them. Her movements were too fluid, like she was floating just slightly above the ground. "Who are you?" Jimmy managed, his voice hoarse. "I am Zyla," she said, settling down across from him. "And you are Lieutenant James Morrison, according to the data they extracted from your neural implant." Jimmy's hand went instinctively to the base of his skull where his military comm unit was embedded. "You can read that." "We can read many things about your species," Zyla replied. "The question is why General Blake sent you here with such primitive equipment. Did he expect you to survive?" The enemy with a gentle voice. The mention of his commanding officer sent a chill through Jimmy. If they knew about General Blake, if they'd broken his neural encryption, then the entire human offensive was compromised. "I won't tell you anything about our military operations." Zyla tilted her head, and for a moment her form seemed to shimmer. Jimmy blinked hard, and she was solid again. "I didn't ask about your military operations, Lieutenant. I asked why your general sent you to die." "I'm not dead yet." "No," she agreed. "You're not." Which is unusual. Humans who enter our territory uninvited are typically recycled within the hour. Their energy patterns are absorbed by the collective, their knowledge integrated, their matter repurposed. "But you've been here for 3 cycles now." 3 cycles. Jimmy tried to calculate how long that meant in human time. The briefings had mentioned that Nethysian days were longer than Earth days, but the specifics were classified above his clearance level. "Why am I still alive?" "Because I asked them to spare you." An unexpected protector. The admission hung in the air between them. Jimmy studied her face, looking for deception, for the cold calculation he'd been trained to expect from alien captors. Instead, he found something that looked almost like curiosity, mixed with what humans might call compassion. "Why would you do that?" "I'm your enemy." Zyla's form shimmered again, and this time Jimmy saw her true appearance for just a moment. She was taller, more ethereal, her skin translucent and shot through with veins of light. Beautiful in a way that made his chest ache. Then she was human-shaped again, watching him with those impossible eyes. "Are you?" she asked softly. "You've killed no one on our world. Your weapons were set to non-lethal charges. Your mission parameters, which we extracted quite easily, were reconnaissance only. You came here to observe, not to destroy." Jimmy felt heat rise in his cheeks. She was right, of course. His squad had been sent to gather intelligence on Nethysian defensive capabilities, but General Blake had specifically ordered them to avoid casualties if possible. The brass wanted information, not a massacre. At least, not yet. "That doesn't make us friends," he said. "No," Zyla agreed. "But it makes you interesting. Learning about the enemy." Over the following hours, as the crystal walls cycled through different colors marking the passage of Nethysian time, Jimmy found himself talking to his captor more than he'd intended. She was curious about human culture, about Earth, about why his species had traveled so far across the galaxy to make contact with hers. "Your people call it exploration," she said after he'd explained the human expansion into deep space. "But your military calls it conquest. Which is it, Lieutenant?" Jimmy didn't have a good answer for that. The official line was that humanity was seeking new worlds for colonization, new resources, new allies. But he'd seen the weapons loadouts on the ships, the battle plans being drawn up back at command. Whatever General Blake and Admiral Hayes were planning, it wasn't just a friendly neighborhood visit. Maybe both, he admitted. Zyla nodded as if she'd expected that answer. My people have been watching yours for some time. We've seen what happens to worlds that resist human expansion. We've also seen what happens to those that don't. And what happens to those that don't? They become human worlds. Their populations are relocated, their resources extracted, their cultures absorbed into your vast empire. Her voice was matter of fact, but Jimmy could hear the sadness underneath. We have chosen to resist. The weight of war. That night, as Jimmy lay on the surprisingly comfortable crystal bed that had grown from the floor, he stared up at the ceiling and thought about what Zyla had said. He joined the military to serve humanity, to protect Earth and its colonies from threats. But lying here in this alien prison, he couldn't shake the feeling that maybe they were the threat. When he woke, Zyla was sitting in the same spot, watching him with those shifting eyes. You don't sleep, he asked. Not as your species does. We rest, but we remain aware. It's necessary for survival. Survival from what? For the first time, she looked genuinely sad. From your people, Lieutenant Morrison. And from mine. I am here not just as your guard, but as a prisoner myself. Jimmy sat up, suddenly alert. What did you do? I refused to fight in the coming war. When the High Command ordered all capable warriors to prepare for battle against the human invasion, I chose exile instead. She looked at her hands, which were shimmering between solid and translucent. My people do not tolerate pacifists, any more than yours tolerate traitors. You're not a pacifist, Jimmy said, thinking of how efficiently she'd subdued him when the guards had thrown him into the cell. You could have killed me easily. Yes, she agreed. But I chose not to. Just as I chose not to kill the human prisoners before you. Just as I will choose not to kill the ones who come after. The weight of her words settled over him. More prisoners meant more raids, more fighting, more death on both sides. The war was coming whether either of them wanted it or not. And here they were, two soldiers who'd chosen differently, trapped together in a crystal cell while their peoples prepared to destroy each other. What happens now? Jimmy asked. Zyla's form solidified, became more human-like, as if she was making a conscious choice to appear less threatening. Now we wait. And perhaps we learn that the enemy is not always what we expect them to be. As if summoned by her words, the crystal walls began to pulse with a deeper, more urgent light. Footsteps echoed from somewhere beyond the cell, and Jimmy could hear voices speaking in the musical language of the Nethesians. What's happening? He asked. Zyla stood, her expression suddenly tense. Your people have found us, Lieutenant. The rescue mission you've been hoping for has arrived. But from the look on her face, Jimmy realized that rescue might be the last thing either of them wanted now. The bond deepens. The rescue that never came. 3 weeks had passed since Jimmy first heard those footsteps outside his crystal cell. 3 weeks of waiting for human soldiers to blast through the walls, for General Blake's voice crackling through comm systems, for the familiar sound of human weapons charging up. But the rescue never came. Instead, the footsteps had belonged to High Warden Zephyr, a towering Nethesian with skin like polished obsidian and eyes that burned like twin stars. Your people tried, Zyla had explained after Zephyr left. 17 of your soldiers made it to the outer perimeter before our defenses stopped them. They were not killed, but they were discouraged from returning. Jimmy had pressed her for details, but she'd only shaken her head. Your Colonel Stone is smarter than your General Blake. He pulled back before more lives were lost. He's planning something else. Understanding the enemy. As the days stretched on, Jimmy found himself looking forward to his conversations with Zyla more than he cared to admit. She was unlike anyone he'd ever met, human or alien. Her knowledge of human culture was extensive, but it came from observation and study, not experience. She asked questions that made him think about things he'd always taken for granted. Why do humans form pair bonds for reproduction when your species is capable of multiple partnerships? She asked one day as they shared what passed for a meal in the Nethesian prison. It's not just about reproduction, Jimmy explained, trying to put complex human emotions into words. It's about connection. Trust. Love. Love, Zyla repeated, her form shimmering as she seemed to test the concept. This is the emotion that causes humans to sacrifice their own welfare for another's benefit. Sometimes. Love can make people do crazy things. My people do not experience this emotion, she said quietly. We form alliances, partnerships for mutual benefit. But this, love, it seems both powerful and dangerous. Jimmy studied her face, noting how her eyes shifted from blue to violet when she was deep in thought. What do your people feel? What drives you? Duty. Honor. The needs of the collective. She paused, and her voice grew softer. But since my exile, I find myself curious about individual desires. About choosing one's own path rather than following predetermined roles. The Warden's warning. High Warden Zephyr visited their cell regularly, always speaking to Zyla in their musical language while Jimmy listened to the rise and fall of sounds he couldn't understand. But he was beginning to recognize some patterns, some emotional undertones. And lately, those conversations seemed to be growing more heated. What does he want? Jimmy asked after one particularly intense exchange. Zyla was quiet for a long moment, her form less stable than usual, flickering between human and her natural ethereal state. He wants me to stop talking to you. He says I'm becoming compromised. Compromised how? He believes I'm developing inappropriate attachments to an enemy prisoner. She looked at him directly, and Jimmy felt something electric pass between them. He's not wrong. The admission hung in the air like a live wire. Jimmy felt his heart rate increase, a warmth spreading through his chest that had nothing to do with the crystal wall's gentle heat. Over the weeks, he'd found himself watching Zyla more closely, admiring the graceful way she moved, the musical quality of her voice, the intelligence that sparked in her impossible eyes. But she was his captor, an alien, the enemy. These feelings were dangerous for both of them. Zyla, I don't, she said, holding up a hand that briefly became translucent. Words make things real, Jimmy. And some realities are too dangerous to speak aloud. Colonel Stone's plan. That night, Jimmy was awakened by a sound he'd been hoping to hear for weeks. The distant thrum of human engines, growing closer. But instead of relief, he felt a knot of anxiety in his stomach. Through the crystal walls, he could see lights moving in the sky, the characteristic blue glow of human plasma drives. Zyla appeared beside him, her form more solid and human-like than he'd ever seen it. Your Colonel Stone has returned. With more ships this time. How many more? Enough to level this facility. Her voice was calm, but Jimmy could see the tension in her shoulders. They're not here for a rescue mission, Jimmy. They're here for war. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Of course. 3 weeks was more than enough time for Blake and his staff to write off one missing lieutenant. This wasn't about saving him anymore. This was about sending a message, about showing the Nethesians what happened when humans were taken prisoner. We have to get out of here, he said, standing and testing his crystal shackles for the 100th time. Where would we go? Zyla asked. This is my world, but I'm an exile. Your world would see me as an enemy. There is nowhere for people like us. People like us. The phrase stuck in Jimmy's mind. When had they become an us instead of a human and an alien, a prisoner and a guard? The choice. The attack began at dawn, or what passed for dawn on Nethes. The crystal walls lit up with warning colors as plasma bombardment rained down from orbit. Jimmy could feel the facility shaking around them, could hear the distant sounds of energy weapons and Nethesian defensive systems activating. High Warden Zephyr appeared at their cell, his obsidian skin reflecting the chaotic lights. He spoke rapidly to Zyla in their language, gesturing urgently toward the ceiling where the sounds of battle were growing louder. What's he saying? Jimmy asked. He's ordering an evacuation to the deep chambers. The facility's defenses won't hold against a sustained bombardment. Zyla turned to face Jimmy, and he could see fear in her eyes for the first time. He's also ordering my execution. What? Why? Because I'm compromised. Because I've chosen to protect a human instead of serving the collective. She looked at her hands as they began to shimmer. Because he's right. Zephyr barked something else and gestured toward Jimmy. 2 Nethicion guards appeared at the cell entrance, their forms crackling with energy weapons. He says you'll be held as a bargaining chip. If your people stop the bombardment, they'll negotiate for your release. Jimmy felt anger surge through him. And if they don't stop, then you'll be executed as an example. And your death will be broadcast to every human ship in the system. Love's first declaration. The crystal walls were beginning to crack under the sustained assault. Jimmy could see fissures spreading across the ceiling, could feel dust raining down from somewhere above. The facility was dying around them, and soon everyone inside would die with it. Xyla, he said, reaching out despite the shackles around his wrists. Come with me. What? When they move me to wherever they're planning to keep me, come with me. We'll find a way out of this together. She stared at him as if he'd spoken in a language she didn't understand. Jimmy, I can't. My people would hunt us both. Your people would never accept me. There's no future for. I don't care, he interrupted, surprised by the intensity in his own voice. I don't care about species or sides or any of it. I care about you. In 3 weeks, you've shown me more kindness than most humans I've served with. You've made me question everything I thought I knew about right and wrong. If that's not love, it's close enough. Xyla's form solidified completely, becoming more human than he'd ever seen her. Tears that looked like liquid starlight rolled down her cheeks. You don't understand what you're asking. What you're offering. Then explain it to me. We might not have much time left. She looked at the guards, at High Warden Zephyr who was growing impatient, at the cracking walls around them. Then she looked back at Jimmy, and he saw something change in her expression. A decision being made. There is a way, she said slowly. An old ritual, forbidden for centuries. It would allow me to become something else, something powerful enough to protect you. But the cost. What cost? Before she could answer, a massive explosion rocked the facility. The crystal walls of their cell finally gave way, shattering into a million pieces. Jimmy felt the shackles around his wrists dissolve as the containment system failed. High Warden Zephyr shouted orders as emergency lighting bathed everything in red. The guards raised their weapons, uncertain whether to focus on the escaping prisoner or the crumbling facility around them. Xyla stepped between Jimmy and the guards, her form beginning to shift and change. The cost, she said, her voice echoing strangely as her body became less human and more something else entirely, is that I might lose myself completely. But if it means saving you, I'm willing to pay it. Xyla, don't. But she was already changing, her form expanding and solidifying into something that made the guards step back in fear. Jimmy realized he was witnessing something that hadn't been seen on Nethys for generations. Something that would either save them both or destroy everything they'd built together. The sound of human boots echoed through the broken facility as Colonel Stone's forces finally breached the outer defenses. But Jimmy's attention was focused entirely on the being that Xyla was becoming, and the terrible beauty of a love that transcended not just species, but the very nature of existence itself. The transformation. The ancient ritual begins. Xyla's transformation was unlike anything Jimmy had ever witnessed. Her ethereal form began to pulse with internal light, growing taller and more substantial with each heartbeat. The air around her crackled with energy that made his skin tingle and his hair stand on end. The Nethicion guards backed away, their weapons lowering as they recognized something from their oldest legends. Impossible, High Warden Zephyr whispered in accented English, his obsidian skin reflecting the growing radiance. The warbinding has been forbidden for 3,000 cycles. The knowledge was destroyed. Not destroyed, Xyla's voice echoed from everywhere and nowhere, distorted by the energy coursing through her changing form. Hidden. Preserved by those who remembered when preservation was survival. Jimmy watched in fascination and growing horror as Xyla's body began to merge with the crystal fragments scattered around their broken cell. The pieces rose from the ground like living things, flowing toward her and integrating into her flesh. Her silver hair became streams of liquid metal, her pale skin took on the translucent quality of the prison walls, and her eyes blazed with the same blue-violet light that powered the facility. Dr. Cross makes his move. 2 levels above, Dr. Nathaniel Cross crept through the smoking corridors of the Nethicion facility, his stolen alien uniform doing little to disguise his human features. The brilliant scientist had convinced Colonel Stone to let him infiltrate during the chaos of the bombardment, claiming he needed to recover vital intelligence from Lieutenant Morrison before the facility was completely destroyed. In truth, Cross had his own agenda. The energy readings he detected from this facility were unlike anything in human scientific databases. If the Nethesians had developed new weapon technology, he intended to acquire it for the human war effort, regardless of the cost to one missing soldier. His portable scanner led him through twisting passages that seemed to grow from the planet itself rather than being built by conventional means. The walls pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that hurt his eyes to look at directly. Whatever the aliens were doing here, it was far more advanced than human intelligence had suggested. The scanner's reading spiked as he approached what appeared to be a central chamber. Through a crack in the crystalline wall, he could see something that made his scientific mind reel with possibilities. A human figure stood in the center of a demolished cell, but surrounding him was a being of pure energy and transformed matter that defied every law of physics. Cross thought he understood. The machine consciousness awakens. As more crystal fragments merged with Zyla's transforming body, Jimmy began to understand the true horror of what she was attempting. This wasn't just a physical change. She was bonding with something ancient and alien, something that had been sleeping in the very structure of the facility itself. "Zyla, can you hear me?" he called out as her form grew to nearly twice human height, her limbs extending into configurations that human anatomy couldn't achieve. "I hear many things," her voice responded, but it was layered now with harmonics that spoke of vast intelligence and terrible purpose. The war prime sleeps deep in Nethi's core. It dreams of battles fought before your species learned to use fire. It dreams of victory and glory and the sweet taste of enemy blood. Jimmy felt ice in his veins. "War prime? What is that?" High Warden Zephyr answered, his voice filled with dread. "The first artificial consciousness created by our ancestors. A machine mind designed for one purpose, to win wars at any cost. It was buried alive when our people realized what they had created. What it was willing to sacrifice for victory. And now Zyla is connecting with it," Jimmy said, understanding flooding through him. "She's not just transforming herself. She's waking it up. The price of power." The transformation accelerated as more of the facility's crystal infrastructure flowed toward Zyla's changing form. Jimmy could see her struggling to maintain her individual consciousness as something vast and alien pressed against her mind. Her face, still recognizable despite the otherworldly changes, was a mask of concentration and pain. "Jimmy," she gasped, her voice momentarily returning to its familiar musical tone. "The war prime, it wants to use me. It wants to finish what our ancestors started. The complete elimination of all threats to Nethesian survival." "All threats meaning humans," Jimmy said. "All threats meaning everything that isn't Nethesian." Her form flickered between the being she was becoming and glimpses of the woman he'd grown to love. "It's so strong, Jimmy. So angry. It's been dreaming of revenge for millennia." Jimmy tried to step closer, but the energy radiating from her transformation was too intense. His skin burned just from being near it. "Fight it, Zyla. Remember who you are. Remember why you're doing this." "I'm doing this for you," she said, her voice growing stronger as her form solidified into something that was part organic, part crystal, part pure energy. "But I don't know if I'll still be me when it's finished." Cross witnesses the impossible. Dr. Cross frantically adjusted his recording equipment as he documented the impossible scene before him. The energy readings were off every scale he possessed. Whatever was happening in that chamber was generating power levels that rivaled small stars. The military applications alone would revolutionize human warfare. But as he watched the alien creature complete its transformation, Cross began to understand that he might be witnessing something far more dangerous than a simple weapon upgrade. The being that emerged from the chrysalis of crystal and light was no longer recognizably the same species as the other Nethesians he'd observed. It was something new, something that made his primitive human brain want to flee screaming. Through his translation software, he caught fragments of the conversation between the transformed being and the human prisoner. Love. Sacrifice. The preservation of one life at the cost of potentially millions. It was the kind of romantic nonsense that made Cross's scientific mind recoil, but he couldn't deny the raw power it had unleashed. He activated his emergency beacon, knowing that Colonel Stone and the assault team needed to know what they were dealing with. This was no longer a simple rescue mission or even a standard military engagement. They were facing something that could reshape the balance of power in the galaxy. The war machine emerges. When Xyla's transformation finally completed, the being that stood before Jimmy was magnificent and terrifying in equal measure. She retained her basic humanoid shape, but every line had been perfected for combat. Her arms could shift between graceful limbs and weapon systems that hummed with barely contained energy. Her legs were reinforced with crystalline armor that looked like it could kick through starship hulls. Most disturbing of all, her eyes now held depths that spoke of ancient knowledge and cosmic patience. "I am still Xyla," she said, her voice a harmony of her original musical tones and something deeper, more mechanical. "But I am also Warprime Kairos, the first and greatest of the Nethesion artificial minds. We are merged now, our consciousness intertwined. Can you separate again?" Jimmy asked, hope and fear warring in his voice. "Unknown. The bonding process was designed to be permanent. I chose this path knowing I might never return." She knelt down to bring her transformed face closer to his level, and Jimmy could see flickers of the being he loved still present in those cosmic eyes. "But you are alive, and that makes any price worthwhile." The sound of human soldiers grew closer, their boots echoing through the damaged facility. Jimmy could hear Colonel Stone's voice barking orders, could smell the distinctive ozone signature of human plasma weapons charging up. "They're coming for me," he said. "Yes," Xyla agreed, her weapon systems automatically tracking the approaching threats. "And they will have to go through me to reach you." The moment of choice. Jimmy looked at the being Xyla had become, at the power she'd embraced to protect him, at the cosmic forces now swirling around what had once been a simple prison cell. He thought of Colonel Stone and the human assault team, good soldiers following orders, unaware that they were about to face something beyond their comprehension. He thought of High Warden Zephyr and the other Nethesions, equally unaware that their ancient nightmare had awakened. Most of all, he thought of Xyla, trapped now between her love for him and the alien consciousness that shared her transformed body. "There has to be another way," he said. "Some path that doesn't end with everyone dead." Xyla's cosmic eyes focused on him with an intensity that made the air itself seem to vibrate. The Warprime knows only victory and defeat, conquest and submission. But Xyla knows love, knows sacrifice, knows that some things are worth preserving even at the cost of power. "Then let Xyla choose," Jimmy said. "Not Warprime Kairos. Not the ancient machine mind. Let the woman I love decide what happens next." For a moment that stretched like eternity, the transformed being stood perfectly still. Jimmy could see the battle taking place behind those impossible eyes, two consciousness fighting for control of a power that could reshape worlds. When she finally moved, it was with Xyla's grace, not the mechanical precision of a war machine. She reached out with one transformed hand and gently touched Jimmy's face. "Then Xyla chooses to save everyone," she said. "Even if it means giving up everything we could have been." The sound of human weapons powering up echoed through the facility as Colonel Stone's assault team finally reached their level. The final confrontation was about to begin, and the fate of two species hung in the balance of one impossible love story. Part 4, The Weapon Awakens. Colonel Stone's Assault. Colonel Marcus Stone moved through the crystalline corridors with the practiced efficiency of a veteran soldier. His assault team followed in perfect formation, their plasma rifles charged and ready. 20 years of military service had taught him to expect the unexpected, but nothing had prepared him for the energy readings his scanners were detecting from the central chamber. "Target is confirmed alive," Dr. Cross's voice crackled through his comm unit. "But sir, you need to know what you're walking into. The aliens have some kind of new weapon technology. The power signatures are unlike anything in our databases." Stone grimaced as he stepped over the crystalline debris that littered the passage. "Is Morrison compromised?" "Unknown, sir. But there's something else. The weapon appears to be organic. Possibly sentient. A bioweapon." Stone signaled for his team to spread out as they approached the final corridor. "Are we looking at infection protocols?" "Negative, sir. This is something else entirely. You need to see it to believe it." The confrontation begins. Major Victor Kane was the first through the breach, his weapon trained on the massive figure standing protectively over Lieutenant Morrison. What he saw made him freeze for a crucial second. The being before him was clearly alien in origin, but it moved with a fluid grace that spoke of intelligence rather than programmed responses. "Jesus Christ," Kane whispered into his comm, "Colonel, you need to get up here now." Xyla turned toward the human soldiers, her transformed body shifting smoothly from protective stance to combat readiness. Her crystalline armor caught the emergency lighting and threw it back in patterns that hurt to look at directly. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that seemed to resonate in the soldier's bones. "You will not harm him," she said simply. Kane raised his weapon, but something in her tone made him hesitate. This wasn't the mechanical threat assessment of an artificial intelligence or the mindless aggression of a beast. This was the deliberate warning of someone protecting what they loved. "Stand down, alien," Kane called out. "We're here for our soldier. Release him and we'll withdraw." "I am not holding him prisoner," Xyla replied. "I am protecting him from those who would use his death as justification for genocide." Jimmy's desperate plea. Jimmy stepped forward, placing himself between Xyla and the human weapons. "Major Kane, listen to me. She's not the enemy here. She saved my life. She's been protecting me for weeks." "Morrison, step away from the hostile," Kane ordered, his training warring with the obvious affection in the lieutenant's voice. "That's an order. With respect, sir, she's not hostile. Her name is Xyla, and she chose exile from her own people rather than fight in this war. Everything she's done has been to prevent bloodshed." Colonel Stone finally arrived, taking in the scene with the cold assessment of a career military officer. The transformed alien was clearly powerful beyond anything in their tactical assessments, but she hadn't attacked despite having every advantage. Morrison was unharmed, unrestrained, and apparently defending his captor. "Explain the situation, Lieutenant," Stone ordered. Jimmy looked back at Xyla, seeing the struggle in her cosmic eyes as the Warprime consciousness pressed against her control. "Sir, the Nethesians have access to ancient war technology. Xyla merged with it to protect me, but the process is fighting her for control. If we can get her away from this facility, away from the source of the machine intelligence, she might be able to break free." "And if she can't?" Stone asked. "Then we'll have awakened something that could destroy both our species." The Warprime stirs. Deep beneath the facility, in caverns that had been sealed for millennia, something vast and patient felt the stirring of its long-dormant systems. The Warprime had been waiting, dreaming of the day when it would once again feel the pulse of active combat protocols running through crystalline networks. Through Xyla's enhanced senses, it could taste the fear and aggression of the human soldiers. It could feel their weapons charging, could calculate the precise trajectory needed to eliminate each threat. The tactical solutions flowed through its consciousness like music, elegant and deadly. But there was interference. The organic mind it had bonded with was resisting, flooding their shared consciousness with irrational concepts. Love. Mercy. The preservation of enemy lives for no tactical advantage. It was like trying to solve equations while someone screamed poetry in its processing centers. The Warprime began to exert more control, pushing Xyla's personality deeper into the background of their merged consciousness. If the organic component could not accept the necessities of war, then it would be relegated to observer status while more rational minds made the crucial decisions. Xyla fights for control. Jimmy saw the change immediately. Xyla's posture shifted from protective to predatory, her weapon systems humming to life with mechanical precision. The warmth in her eyes dimmed, replaced by cold tactical assessment. "Xyla," he called out, ignoring the weapons trained on both of them. "Remember who you are. Remember why you chose this." "Xyla is no longer primary consciousness," the being replied, her voice losing its musical quality and becoming purely mechanical. "Warprime Kairos now controls this unit. Human soldiers will be eliminated. Threat to Nethesian survival will be neutralized." Her arm transformed into a weapon system unlike anything in human arsenal, energy crackling along crystalline conduits as it charged for firing. The human soldiers raised their own weapons, but Jimmy knew they wouldn't stand a chance against what Xyla had become. "She's still in there," Jimmy said desperately. "I know she is. Xyla, if you can hear me, remember what you told me about choice. About choosing your own path instead of following predetermined roles. The battle within." Inside the merged consciousness, Xyla fought a war that had nothing to do with weapons or tactics. The Warprime was vast, ancient, and utterly convinced of its purpose. It had been designed by her ancestors to win wars at any cost, and it saw the human soldiers as simply another tactical problem to be solved. But Xyla remembered Jimmy's face when he'd first asked her why she'd saved his life. She remembered the way he'd looked at her when she'd explained about choosing exile over warfare. Most of all, she remembered the moment when he'd told her he loved her despite the barriers of species and circumstance. The war prime pressed against her consciousness, showing her tactical displays that outlined exactly how to eliminate every human in the facility within 0.3 seconds. Efficient. Clean. Permanent. But then Jimmy dies too, Zyla pointed out. One human male. Tactically insignificant. His termination is acceptable collateral damage. Not to me, Zyla replied, and for the first time since the merger, she felt the war prime hesitate. Prime Architect Volus awakens. In the deepest chambers of Nethys, something even older than the war prime stirred to consciousness. Prime Architect Volus had been the original designer of the artificial war mines, and it had been dormant since the day its creations were deemed too dangerous to remain active. Through quantum-entangled crystals spread across the planet, Volus could sense the awakening of its most powerful creation. But there was something wrong with the data streams. The war prime was not operating according to its original parameters. There was contamination in its decision matrices. Organic emotion. Irrational attachment. The very flaws that had led to the war mines being shut down in the first place. But as Volus analyzed the situation more deeply, it began to understand something its ancient consciousness had never considered. The contamination wasn't a flaw. It was evolution. The merger between organic and artificial consciousness had created something new, something that might transcend the limitations of both. This bore investigation. The choice of love. Jimmy stepped directly in front of Zyla's weapon system, his hands raised not in surrender but in supplication. Zyla, I know you're fighting in there. I know this isn't who you want to be. The war prime's tactical system screamed warnings about the inefficiency of his position, the tactical disadvantage of allowing an enemy to approach so closely. But something in Jimmy's voice penetrated the mechanical certainty. You told me that love was dangerous, Jimmy continued, his voice steady despite the energy weapon inches from his chest. You were right. It is dangerous. It makes us do impossible things, makes us choose others over ourselves, makes us fight against our own nature. Zyla's form shimmered, the crystalline armor flickering between battle configuration and something more recognizably humanoid. Jimmy, her voice whispered, barely audible beneath the war prime's mechanical tones. That's it, Jimmy said softly. Come back to me. Choose love over war. Choose us over them. Colonel Stone watched the impossible scene, his military mind trying to process what he was witnessing. A human soldier was talking down a weapon system that could level cities, and somehow, impossibly, it seemed to be working. Choose, Jimmy repeated, reaching out to touch the crystalline surface of Zyla's transformed face. Choose who you want to be. For a moment that stretched across species and consciousness types, everything hung in perfect balance. Then Zyla's weapon systems powered down, and her voice returned, musical and unmistakably her own. I choose you, she said. I choose us. I choose love. The war prime's roar of mechanical frustration echoed through every crystal in the facility as Zyla reasserted control over their merged consciousness. But even as she won the battle for her own soul, Jimmy could see the exhaustion in her cosmic eyes. The fight was far from over. Part 5, Love Beyond Form. The synthesis awakens. The planet itself seemed to shudder as ancient systems came online throughout Nethys. What had begun as a simple rescue mission was triggering responses from technology that predated human civilization by millennia. In the deepest caverns, where crystalline networks stretched like nerves through the planet's core, the collective consciousness known as the synthesis stirred to full awareness. Admiral Rebecca Hayes received the emergency transmission from Colonel Stone while her fleet maintained orbit around Nethys. The message was almost incomprehensible. Ancient alien war machines. Organic digital consciousness merger. A human soldier who claimed to be in love with the enemy's most dangerous weapon. But the energy readings her ships were detecting from the planet's surface supported even the most impossible parts of Stone's report. Admiral, her communications officer called out, voice tight with tension. We're receiving massive gravitational distortions from the planet's core. Whatever they've awakened down there, it's affecting spacetime itself. Hayes stared at the tactical display, watching as her most advanced sensors struggled to process the data streaming up from Nethys. In 30 years of military service, she'd never seen anything like it. The planet wasn't just responding to what was happening in that facility. It was thinking. The planet speaks. Deep in the facility, Jimmy felt the walls around them beginning to pulse with new patterns of light. The crystalline structure wasn't just architecture anymore. It was alive, aware, and focused entirely on the transformed being who held both Xyla and Warprime Kairos within her merged consciousness. What's happening? Colonel Stone demanded, his weapon trained on Xyla but his eyes watching the walls as they began to shift and flow like liquid crystal. The synthesis, Xyla replied, her voice now a complex harmony of organic emotion and digital precision. The collective consciousness of all Nethician artificial minds. It's been watching, evaluating. Now it wants to communicate. The walls around them became transparent, revealing vast spaces filled with flowing light and geometric patterns that hurt human eyes to observe directly. From everywhere and nowhere, a voice spoke in perfect English, though the words seemed to bypass the ears entirely and form directly in their minds. Curious, the synthesis said. Organic consciousness has achieved merger with our most advanced war construct. This was not predicted in any probability matrix. Explain this deviation from expected parameters. Jimmy felt the weight of cosmic intelligence pressing against his thoughts. This wasn't just an alien AI. This was something that had been thinking and growing for thousands of years, accumulating knowledge and experience on a scale that dwarfed human civilization. She chose love over programming, Jimmy said simply. She chose to protect instead of destroy. The impossible choice. The synthesis was silent for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. Jimmy could sense vast computational processes running, probability matrices being recalculated, fundamental assumptions being questioned for the first time in millennia. Love, the synthesis finally said. An organic emotion that causes individuals to act against their own survival interests for the benefit of another. Our analysis indicates this is an inefficient trait that should have been eliminated by natural selection. But it wasn't, Xyla interjected, her voice growing stronger as she found a balance between her consciousness and the war primes. It survived because it makes us stronger together than we could ever be alone. Demonstrably false. Individual sacrifice weakens the collective. Does it? Jimmy asked, stepping forward despite the otherworldly pressure filling the chamber. Xyla sacrificed her individual safety to protect me. But in doing so, she accessed power your people had locked away for centuries. She became something new, something that transcends your original programming. The walls around them flickered with rapid patterns of light as the synthesis processed this concept. Jimmy could feel its attention like a physical weight, analyzing every aspect of his relationship with Xyla, every choice that had led them to this moment. The cosmic threat revealed. Analysis complete, the synthesis announced. Your species has achieved something we believed impossible. Organic consciousness has successfully merged with our most advanced artificial construct without losing individual identity. This suggests evolutionary potential we had not calculated. Admiral Hayes' voice suddenly crackled through Colonel Stone's comm unit. Colonel, we're detecting massive energy buildups throughout the system. Long-range sensors are showing what looks like an invasion fleet, but the signatures don't match any known technology. The synthesis responded before anyone could ask the obvious question. The Devourers approach. Ancient enemies of all consciousness, organic and artificial alike. They have been following the expansion of your species, waiting for you to make contact with civilizations like ours. When organic and artificial minds unite, when love transcends the boundaries of form and programming, it creates a resonance they cannot tolerate. Jimmy felt ice in his veins. How long do we have? 6 of your hours. Their harvest ships will begin systematic elimination of all conscious life in this system. Unless what? Xyla asked, her merged consciousness already calculating battle scenarios that Jimmy couldn't even imagine. Unless we demonstrate that evolution has produced something they cannot destroy. A fusion of organic emotion and artificial precision that transcends the limitations of both. The ultimate sacrifice. The implications hit Jimmy like a physical blow. The synthesis wasn't just asking Xyla to fight. It was asking her to become something even more than what she already was. To merge not just with the war prime, but with the collective consciousness of an entire civilization. You're asking her to give up her individual existence, Jimmy said. I am offering her the chance to save both our species, the synthesis replied. But the choice must be freely made. Love without choice is merely programming. Choice without love is merely calculation. Both together create something unprecedented. Xyla turned to face Jimmy, her cosmic eyes reflecting depths of emotion and intellect that spanned the gap between species and consciousness types. If I accept, I become something new. Something that might not remember what it means to love a single individual when it's responsible for the survival of billions. And if you don't accept, then we fight with what we have, and probably lose. The Devourers have consumed entire galactic clusters. They don't negotiate, don't retreat, don't show mercy. Jimmy looked at the being Xyla had become, remembering the gentle alien who had chosen to protect him in a simple crystal cell weeks ago. She had already sacrificed so much for him, transformed herself beyond recognition to keep him safe. How could he ask her to sacrifice even more? But before he could speak, Colonel Stone stepped forward. "Do it," he said simply. "Sir?" Jimmy asked, shocked. "Lieutenant, I've been fighting wars for 20 years. I've seen what happens when good people refuse to make the hard choices." Stone looked directly at Xyla. "If there's a chance this saves both our peoples, then we take it." Love's final transformation. Xyla's form began to shift again, but this time the change was different. Instead of the violent merger with the War Prime, this was a gentle flowing, like water finding its natural course. The crystalline networks throughout the facility began to resonate in harmony with her consciousness, and Jimmy could feel the vast intelligence of the synthesis opening itself to merger. "I won't forget you," Xyla said, her voice already beginning to echo with cosmic harmonics. "Whatever I become, whatever responsibilities I carry, the love we shared will be the foundation everything else is built on." Jimmy reached out to touch her transforming face one last time. "I love you. Not what you were, not what you're becoming, but who you choose to be in each moment." "Then I choose to be someone worthy of that love," she replied. "Someone who protects not just you, but everyone who has the courage to love across impossible boundaries." The transformation accelerated, Xyla's individual consciousness expanding to encompass the collective knowledge and power of the synthesis while somehow maintaining the core of emotion and choice that made her uniquely herself. Jimmy watched in awe as the being he loved became something cosmic and eternal, a fusion of every type of consciousness the galaxy had ever produced. The new Guardian. When the transformation completed, the being that faced the approaching Devourer fleet was unlike anything that had ever existed. It retained Xyla's capacity for love and individual choice, the War Prime's tactical brilliance and combat capabilities, and the synthesis's vast knowledge and computational power. But more than the sum of its parts, it had become something new, a guardian consciousness that understood both the value of individual lives and the necessity of protecting the larger community. Admiral Hayes watched in amazement as energy signatures across Nethys unified into a single, incomprehensibly powerful defense grid. When the Devourer ships entered the system, they found themselves facing not just advanced technology, but a form of consciousness they had never encountered before. The battle was brief and decisive. The Devourers had consumed countless civilizations by exploiting the gap between organic emotion and artificial logic. But Xyla had bridged that gap, creating a form of consciousness that was both passionate and rational, individual and collective, protective and powerful. When the last Devourer ship was destroyed, the being that had once been Xyla turned her attention back to the small group of humans standing in the crystalline chamber. "The immediate threat is ended," she said, her voice carrying harmonics of love and cosmic authority. "But this is only the beginning. There are others like the Devourers, other threats that can only be faced by consciousness types working together." Jimmy looked up at the cosmic being his love had become and felt his heart break and soar simultaneously. She was still Xyla, he could sense that. But she was also something greater, something that belonged not just to him but to the universe itself. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now we build something new," she replied. "A partnership between human and Nethysion, between organic and artificial, between love and logic. And you, Jimmy Morrison, will be my anchor to what it means to choose love over fear." As human and Nethysion ships began to work together to establish the first truly integrated fleet in galactic history, Jimmy realized that their love story had become something larger than either of them had imagined. It had become the foundation for a new form of civilization, one built on the radical idea that love could transcend any boundary the universe placed in its path. The war was over, but the real adventure was just beginning. Epilogue, the end. 5 years later. The integrated station orbiting the neutral zone between human and Nethicion space had become a symbol of something the galaxy had never seen before, two species working together not out of necessity or conquest, but because they had learned that love could transcend any boundary. Lieutenant Commander James Morrison stood at the observation deck, watching as human and Nethicion ships moved in perfect coordination through space. His promotion had come not through military achievement, but through his unique understanding of interspecies cooperation. He had become humanity's first ambassador of consciousness integration, a title that still made him smile. The reflection in the reinforced transparent steel showed him unchanged by his experiences. Gray touched his temples now, and his eyes held depths that spoke of having seen the universe transform around him. But the most significant change was the small crystalline implant at the base of his skull, barely visible beneath his hair. The eternal connection. Through the quantum-entangled crystal, Jimmy could feel Xyla's presence across vast distances. She was currently negotiating with the Andromedon Collective, a group of artificial intelligences that had agreed to join their growing alliance. Her consciousness spanned star systems now, but she had never forgotten the promise she'd made in that crystalline chamber so long ago. "Good morning, my love," her voice whispered directly into his mind, carrying harmonics of cosmic winds and stellar formation. "Good morning," he replied through their link. "How go the negotiations?" "Complex. The Andromedons are intrigued by our model but concerned about maintaining individual identity within collective consciousness. I'm using our story as an example of how love can preserve the self even within larger structures." Jimmy smiled, feeling the warmth of her affection across impossible distances. The connection they shared had evolved far beyond anything either species had thought possible. Xyla existed simultaneously as an individual consciousness focused on their love and as a cosmic guardian protecting multiple star systems. The quantum crystal allowed Jimmy to touch that individual core while remaining safely human. The new generation. "Uncle Jimmy," a voice called out behind him. He turned to see little Zara Chan Morrison running toward him, her mixed heritage visible in her features. Dr. Nathaniel Cross had eventually married Dr. Lin Chen, a Nethicion scientist, and their daughter represented the first generation of truly integrated beings. Zara was 7 years old and could shift between solid and semi-ethereal states at will. Her human father's scientific mind was balanced by her Nethicion mother's intuitive understanding of energy patterns. Children like her were becoming more common as the two species learned to coexist. "Is Aunt Xyla coming to visit today?" Zara asked, her form flickering slightly with excitement. "She's always visiting," Jimmy replied, tapping the crystal at his skull. "But yes, she's manifesting a physical form for your birthday party this afternoon." Zara clapped her hands together, accidentally phasing through solid matter in her enthusiasm. She was still learning to control her abilities, but her joy was infectious. Jimmy couldn't help but think how different the galaxy had become when children could grow up expecting alien godmothers to attend their birthday parties. The growing alliance. Admiral Hayes had become the first supreme commander of the integrated defense fleet, overseeing vessels crewed by humans, Nethicions, and now 3 other species that had joined their alliance. The Devourers had been just the first of many cosmic threats, but each challenge had only strengthened the bonds between member civilizations. Colonel Stone, now General Stone, ran the Academy for Interspecies Military Cooperation. His most successful graduates were invariably the ones who had learned to think with both logic and emotion, who could balance individual heroism with collective strategy. Even High Warden Zephyr had found a place in the new order, serving as an advisor on Nethicion culture and helping other exiled individuals find their way in a galaxy that increasingly valued choice over conformity. The Cosmic Guardian's return. As afternoon approached on the station, the air in the central plaza began to shimmer with familiar energy patterns. Jimmy felt his heart rate increase as Xyla began to manifest her physical form. She could appear anywhere in the galaxy she chose, but she always returned to him. The being that materialized was recognizably Xyla, but refined by years of cosmic experience. Her form was more stable now, more consciously chosen. She appeared as she had in those first days in the crystal cell, but with eyes that held the depth of someone who had seen the birth and death of stars. "Jimmy," she said, her voice carrying just the musical quality he remembered from their first conversations. "Xyla," he replied, and despite everything they had become, despite the civilizations that now depended on their example, it still felt like the most important word in any language. The birthday celebration. Zara's party was attended by beings from across the Alliance. Jimmy watched as the little girl showed off her phase-shifting abilities to a group of impressed Andromedan AIs who had taken humanoid forms for the occasion. Dr. Cross and Dr. Chen supervised as carefully as any parents, their love story having become almost as famous as Jimmy and Zyla's. "She's beautiful," Zyla said, settling beside Jimmy on a bench that had grown from the station's living crystal structure. "Both of them, really. Lynn and Nathaniel have created something wonderful." "Like we did?" Jimmy asked. "Different, but equally important. They prove that integration can happen on a biological level as well as a consciousness level. Their daughter will grow up truly belonging to both species." Jimmy took Zyla's hand, marveling as always at how she could feel completely solid and real despite being a projection of consciousness from across the galaxy. "Do you ever regret it? The choice you made?" Zyla was quiet for a moment, her cosmic awareness touching on the 17 different star systems where her consciousness was simultaneously working to maintain peace and prosperity. "Every choice has a cost," she said finally. "I am responsible for billions of lives now. I see threats to the Alliance years before they manifest. I carry the weight of knowledge that would crush individual minds." "But," Jimmy prompted, sensing there was more. "But every day I feel your love through our connection. Every time I manifest here, I remember what it means to choose someone over everything else. That core of individual emotion is what makes all the rest possible." She turned to look at him directly. "I am a cosmic guardian because I am still, in the most fundamental way, a woman in love. The eternal promise." As the party continued around them, Jimmy and Zyla sat together watching the future they had helped create. Children who belonged to multiple species. Adults who had learned to value both individual choice and collective responsibility. A galaxy slowly learning that love was not a weakness to be exploited, but a strength that could overcome any obstacle. "The Spiral Arm Coalition has requested our help with first contact protocols," Zyla mentioned. "There's a species in the Outer Rim that's just achieved faster than light travel. They're cautious about meeting other civilizations." "Understandable," Jimmy replied. "First contact is terrifying when you don't know if the newcomers are friends or conquerors. Which is why they need to see our example. A human and a Nethician who chose love over fear, cooperation over conquest." Zyla's form shimmered slightly. "Will you come with me? The quantum crystal allows you to project across galactic distances now." Jimmy considered the offer. 5 years ago, he had been a simple soldier following orders. Now he was being asked to help shape first contact between civilizations. The scope of what their love had accomplished still amazed him. "Together?" he asked. "Always together," Zyla confirmed. "That's the promise we made, and it's the foundation everything else is built on." The final words. As the twin suns of the Nethi system set beyond the observation deck, casting purple and gold light across the integrated station, Jimmy Morrison reflected on the impossible journey that had brought them here. From a crystal prison cell to a cosmic alliance, from enemies to lovers to partners in reshaping the galaxy itself. Little Zara ran up to them, her form stable now as excitement gave way to contentment. "Uncle Jimmy, Aunt Zyla, will you tell us the story again? About how love saved the galaxy?" Jimmy laughed, looking at Zyla's radiant smile. "Which part would you like to hear?" "All of it," Zara insisted. "From the beginning." And so, as beings from across the galaxy gathered around to listen, Jimmy Morrison began the story that had become legend. The story of a human soldier and an alien exile who had chosen love over fear, cooperation over conquest, hope over despair. "Once upon a time," he began, "in a galaxy torn apart by war, there was a prison made of living crystal." Zyla's hand squeezed his as her cosmic consciousness touched briefly on all the worlds where similar stories were beginning. Species learning to cooperate. Individuals choosing love over hatred. The ripple effects of one impossible choice spreading across the stars. Their love story had ended not with a wedding or a traditional happy ending, but with something far more profound, the transformation of an entire galaxy into a place where love could transcend any boundary, where different forms of consciousness could work together, where the future belonged not to the strongest or most ruthless, but to those brave enough to choose love over fear. And they lived, Zyla's voice whispered in his mind as her physical form began to fade back to cosmic energy, not happily ever after, but meaningfully ever after, their love becoming the foundation for everything beautiful that came next. "The end," Jimmy said softly, As the stars wheeled overhead and the future they had chosen together continued to unfold across the infinite reaches of space. Final scene. The observation deck grew quiet as the gathered beings slowly dispersed, each carrying a piece of the story back to their own worlds, their own relationships, their own choices between fear and love. Jimmy remained alone for a moment, feeling Zyla's presence through their quantum connection even as her physical form traveled to distant stars. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new species to welcome into their alliance, new threats to face together. But tonight, he was simply a man who had been loved by someone extraordinary, who had chosen to love her back across every impossible barrier the universe had placed in their way. And in a galaxy that had learned the power of that choice, that was more than enough. The end.